The following podcast is an exclusive presentation of Project Entertainment Network.
Hey folks, Brian Keene here. You know, summer's over. We're entering the fall and then the winter. Halloween's coming up, Thanksgiving, and then of course the holiday shopping season. Speaking of the holiday shopping season, let me tell you about subculturecorsets.com. They've got everything you need for everyone on your list for this holiday season. Clothing, accessories, gifts, books, you name it, they've got it. They sponsor every show on the Project Entertainment Network, including this one. So please give them your business. Visit subculturecorsets.com.
Project Entertainment Network presents My Favorite Story, an anthology featuring short fiction written by the hosts of the Project Entertainment Network podcasts, with
Mary Sangiovanni and Brian Keene from The Horror Show,
Chuck Buda, Aaron Sweet, El Mahari, and Armand Rosamilia of the Mando Method,
Jeannie Engel of Origins,
Bizung's Mr. Frank,
Tom Clark from Necrocast, It On,
It Cooks, Amber Fallon,
Three Guys with Beards, Christopher Golden, Jim Moore and Jonathan Maybury,
The Buttercup of Doom, Kelly Owen,
Matters of Faith's Jay Wilburn,
John Urbancic of Eight Stains.
My Favorite Story, a podcast author anthology from Project Entertainment Network, available on Kindle, Nook, and soon in paperback from the Project Entertainment Network store.
There shall come a podcast like no other. Defenders Dialogue with Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Marvel Comics' original superhero non-team convenes once again. The Incredible Hulk, the Savage Submariner, the Master of the Mystic Arts, Doctor Strange, and a dynamic supporting cast of Marvel superheroes battle against evil as the Defenders. Without further ado, true believers, here's your hosts, Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Excelsior!
And welcome back once again to Defenders Dialogue. I'm Brian Keene.
And I, miraculously today, am Christopher Golden.
Would you be somebody else?
Well, no, but I was almost not here. It was almost you just sitting alone in your house talking about the Defenders, which is sort of like every other day of the week when we don't record this show.
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much.
Skype gave us a little trouble today, which is not unusual.
No,
but
that
Brian,
seems to happen.
In spite of all of that, Excelsior, true believers.
True believers. I want to give a quick hello, Chris, to our new listeners. Defenders Dialogue, along with all the other programs available on the Project Entertainment Network, are now all on Spotify. Just another easy way for you to listen to the show. You can go to Spotify and click play and start listening to us for free. So hello to any new listeners we may have picked up from there.
Excellent.
If you're just joining us for the first time, I feel sorry for you because we are in the middle of something called the Headmen Nebulon Saga.
If you're just joining us for the first time, on this podcast, Brian and I read through the entire history of Marvel's classic 1970s, 1980s series, The Defenders. And we are beginning today, I think, Brian, with issue 38, are we not?
We are. We're going to cover issues 38 through 40 and Defenders Annual number 1.
Number 1. And we're not, by the way, folks, we're not reading to you. We're if you're new to the show, we're just discussing in the biggest and most self-indulgent fanboy wank fest of all time.
That's right. We're getting our geek on is what we're doing. And today, of course, the Headmen Nebulon Saga comes to its senses-shattering conclusion. Now, previously, in last week's episode, when we left off, Kyle Richmond's brain was back in his body. And Doctor Strange, Luke Cage, and the Red Guardian were lying unconscious on the floor of a hospital in New York City. They'd been rendered unconscious by the Porcupine, the Eel, and Plant Man, who are working for Nebulon, the Celestial Man.
Can you imagine if somebody is actually listening to this podcast for the first time, starting with this episode? I mean, it's just like, it's like that Jimmy Kimmel thing that was on recently where one of his, where I don't remember who it was, came on and a whole bunch of celebrities had created had taken the comic book that Jimmy had written and drawn when he was like 9 years old,
Right.
and actually acted it out and made a trailer for the movie version of Jimmy's 9-year-old comic. I feel like when we're talking about Porcupine and the Eel and Plant Man, man, we're there. We are that comic. Anyway,
We are there. We are there, and they're working now for Nebulon. Nebulon is if you're a first timer, he's a Defenders villain. He's one of their main villains, but he's not really a villain. He's here to save the human race by expanding our consciousness through something he calls celestial mind control.
Exactly. He's like Paul Ryan, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Okay.
Chris, what happens here? What happens on this beautiful splash page rendered by Sal Buscema and Klaus Janson?
Well, I'll tell you. Basically, we have, as you said, Doctor Strange, Power Man, Red Guardian are now not on the floor of a hospital. They're recovering consciousness in some kind of weird limbo realm in a story entitled "Exile to Oblivion."
Dun dun dun.
And the disembodied head of Nebulon hangs over them, and he's saying, "Hear me, Doctor Strange, you have disrupted my plans for the last time," which somehow I feel is not prescient. In any case, he has dumped them in some weird dimension, and of course, there's a bunch of dialogue where Doctor Strange poses, and then he's deciding to try to get them back. But, Brian, you'll never believe it. Somehow Nebulon has created a situation that Doctor Strange's magic cannot overcome. They're trapped here.
We suspect it's Nebulon, but we're not really sure. Doctor Strange tries to do the sleight of hand and transport them back home, but instead he draws lightning down from the sky to zap himself.
So every time he tries to use use his magic, he'll get zapped by lightning. So they end up sitting around a campfire in a cave about to sing Kumbaya. When what happens, Brian, the best thing in the whole issue.
A giant monkey appears. A giant white ape appears. Now, this isn't any Earth ape. This isn't like Gorilla Man of the Headmen, who we'll get to in a little while. This is an interdimensional ape.
It's sort of like Wendigo with the head of a Japanese, no mask or something like that. It's really a strange-looking thing. But
Right. Meanwhile, back in that aforementioned hospital in New York, we find out that Jack Norris, who, adding insult to injury, we keep talking about how Jack is a member of the Defenders, but the other Defenders never take him seriously. He got knocked out with the gas too, but Nebulon didn't deem sending him to this other dimension necessary. So he bursts into the Nighthawk's hospital room, and he tells Kyle that, he got knocked out too. And he fills him in, and Nighthawk jumps out of bed with his head still bandaged. Remember, he just had a brain transplant operation. And he decides it's up to the two of them to rescue the Defenders, because remember, Valkyrie is still missing throughout all this as well, because she's still locked up in that woman's prison.
yeah, this is my favorite bit of this whole thread. I told you this before. This whole story arc. I love Asgardian is the New Black is my version of what the story is. It's Valkyrie in women's prison. She's made a friend. She's got a buddy here. And of course, the sort of giant, intimidating woman who keeps them all in her thrall through fear comes over. She's unhappy that her little chum, the Gilligan to her skipper, if you will, is now buddying around with Valkyrie. So she tries to start some shit with Valkyrie. Valkyrie dumps her lunch on top of the woman's head. And of course, the woman then calls the guards and claims that she was assaulted. So Valkyrie is taken away, Brian, to solitary confinement.
That's right. Just a little thing I noticed in rereading this. This particular issue was the second issue of the Defenders I ever read, ever bought off the stand. Of course, we talked about issue 33 was my first. And, back then in the 70s, we didn't have comic book stores. So if it wasn't on the newsstand, you were probably missing an issue.
Yeah, or at the pharmacy or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, I picked this issue up and I realized, I've missed a few things in between, but this whole thing with Valkyrie in prison, I didn't realize how that had influenced me. Thinking back to my very first novel, The Rising, there's a whole sequence with the main character, Frankie. She is in a similar situation and has a similar antagonist.
That's funny.
I think it must have certainly had a very strong subconscious impact on little Brian back in the day.
It couldn't have been your repeated viewings of Caged Heat then.
No, I didn't see Caged Heat until I was a young man in the Navy. So...
Oh my God! All right, so then we're back in limbo with Doctor Strange, Luke, and the Red Guardian fighting the giant monkey creature. It's exactly what you expect it to be: fight. They defeat it, and then he says, Doctor Strange says, it's as if some part of my brain were unable to, and what he's talking about is that his brain is unable to access the sort of spells that he requires to perform his magic. And then Red Guardian is somehow overrun, and this is weird. Like, it's like, where does this even come from? Is overrun by thousands of ants that are crawling all over her and biting her.
Little interdimensional ants, and they are eating her alive.
Yeah, apparently. All right, and then we get, and again, look, I know I love the Headmen for all of their ineptitude. But this bozo thing, I just hate it. So I'm going to let you take this next bit.
Well, yeah, we flash back to Manhattan, back to Earth, where Nighthawk takes to the sky. He leaves Jack behind, and the first thing he does is he goes to the Celestial Mind Control Foundation, where Nebulon has been. You'll remember the bozos, Nebulon's army of clown people from last episode. Nighthawk busts in. There's a huge fight with them. And then he meets up with Nebulon. Now remember, Nebulon's been disguising himself as this little short bald man. And Nighthawk hasn't encountered him in that incarnation. So he doesn't know he's dealing with Nebulon. He confronts the little bald man, and he wants to know where his friends are. And the little bald man tells him they're right behind this door. So Nighthawk goes charging through this door. Nebulon shuts the door behind him. And Nighthawk emerges into the other dimension, where what he sees is Doctor Strange and Luke Cage
and
fighting ants.
Yes, Luke Cage pounding his fists against the ground to crush ants, and Doctor Strange now using his magic, which in the previous two scenes he said he cannot do, but now using his magic to destroy ants. Before we continue on this particular thing, let me point out, Brian, that you just referred to Nebulon's army of clown people.
Right.
And God, I'll tell you, this would be a much better story if there were indeed an army of actual clown people versus an army of cultists, brainwashed people who are wearing clown masks. An army of clown people, I would read that in a heartbeat.
I think that's tomato, my friend.
No. Clown people are different from people dressed as clowns. But in any case.
Well, with Nighthawk's appearance, Doctor Strange is able to figure out where the actual portal, the doorway back to Earth is. And he does it. And they emerge back into the CMC Foundation, where the cultists dressed as clowns.
No, the army of clown people.
Okay. Is it the army of clown people?
They make short work of the army of clown people. And then they're challenged by Porcupine and the Eel.
Right. Because Plant Man has fled. He's decided enough of this. Fuck this
Plant
shit.
Man is the only smart one among them. He's like, no, man, this is too stupid, even for a guy called Plant Man.
The lucky thing is by, Luke Cage, he carries Red Guardian's unconscious form from the other dimension back to Earth. And when they get to Earth, the ants that are crawling all over her, eating her alive, begin to die. Apparently they can't handle dimensional travel. But the Defenders aren't the only ones to come through the doorway. So does the giant monkey that they were fighting.
Exactly. And then I have to say that I may be making a lot of fun of this issue, but it's still written by Gerber. It's still supremely entertaining. And we're reminded of that as we flip the page and are in what momentarily appears to be a scene in the Old West, but turns out to just be a couple of people who are riding in the Grand Canyon. They're riding horses. They encounter what appears to be a Native American chief sitting in the middle of the path with a fire, who in classic 1970s stereotype raises his hand and says, "How?" as they approach.
That's right.
But
suddenly,
then, go ahead.
The Native American chief's head pops off with a spring. Now, we've seen that before, haven't we, Chris? There was a taxi driver whose head popped off with a spring. There was another seemingly odd human whose head popped off with a spring. And as Defenders readers know, when that happens, an elf with a gun pops out and shoots whatever random passerby happened in the panel. And that's what happens.
The elf with a gun.
Yeah, the elf with a gun is back. We still have no explanation as to why. What is his purpose? Who does he work for?
Marvel should do a collection. Marvel should do a collection of just... I wonder if there are enough of these to make like 20 pages or something. Just put out a single issue with nothing but one page after another of the elf with a gun murdering random innocents.
Without spoilers, you could do it if you include the elf's non-Steve Gerber appearances.
Okay.
This storyline gets wrapped up by another writer, and then years later, J.M. DeMatteis picks up the ball and runs with it. If you included all of those, you could, in fact, have a Marvel trade paperback
called Elf with a Gun.
Elf with a Gun.
Marvel, if you're listening, we demand Elf with a Gun.
We do.
The weekly series. Anyway, actually the next sequence, although I hate fight scenes, I shouldn't say I hate fight scenes. I hate pointless, where there's nothing really going on character-wise. But I do love this next 3-page sequence in spite of that, because it's the alien alternate dimension giant white monkey creature, some bozos, the eel, and the porcupine all fighting Doctor Strange and Luke Cage and Red Guardian and Nighthawk, and basically all getting their asses kicked. And the best part is when some kind of laser beam gun emerges from the porcupine's chest. I'm not familiar enough with the porcupine to know whether or not we've seen that before, but kudos to Gerber. That's crazy.
Well, the Defenders make short work of their foes.
But wait, Brian, There is a piece of dialogue. We haven't quoted a lot of dialogue in this issue, but I do want to share this. Oh my. Red Guardian says to Nighthawk, "A credit to my surgical expertise. The brain I replaced in your skull functions more than adequately, I'd say." And Nighthawk says, "Yeah, I've been meaning to thank you for that." So there you go.
Yep, they defeat the bozos, they defeat Porcupine and Eel, and Doctor Strange uses the Crimson Bands of Cyttorak to bind the giant monkey, leaving him behind.
I know, that's the thing. He binds the giant monkey in some kind of mystical bands, and they leave it in this abandoned apartment building.
Right. And the very last panel, the monkey seems to be undergoing some sort of weird energy transformation. And it's important to note, we've talked at this point in Marvel history, Steve Gerber is writing Omega the Unknown, The Defenders, Howard the Duck, Marvel 2 and 1. So he's overloaded. He's burned out. But this storyline with the monkey never ever gets resolved. It doesn't get resolved in any other Marvel comic. It doesn't get resolved in the Defenders. Whatever transformation is occurring to the giant white ape.
Yep.
It's
well, that's the best bit, because Luke says, yeah, but at least we can catch some Z's before we hit the trenches again. And Nighthawk says, right, we can call the cops to mop up around here. And
Okay.
Doctor Strange says, agreed. I doubt they'll find anything inside beyond their means to cope with. And you do have something going on with this monkey's face. It's transforming into some kind of either weird creature or black hole in dimensional space or something. And yeah, so there you go.
Yeah. You know, for those who don't like current modern day Marvel and, you know, want to return to a more classic era, you know, this seems like a get out of jail free card for Marvel. It's just, you know, whatever was leaking out of that monkey's face has changed continuity. And
absolutely. And we go back to the continuity of the 1970s starting right there.
Yeah.
That's perfect. I'm on board for that. All right. Issue 39, Riot in Cell Block 12, or as Gerber referred to it in the end of the previous issue, Riot in a Women's Prison, or B-Movies Live.
That's right. So we open with Doctor Strange he's sequestered himself in his Sanctum Sanctorum, and he's undergoing a deep inward spiritual journey to try to find out why his magic is suddenly not working.
Right. And it's actually a great splash page by Buscema and Jansen, although reminiscent because Buscema just did layouts and Jansen did finished art. This is reminiscent for me in a way more of like Gene Colan than it is of Buscema, but
very much so.
Yeah, at least that page. All right,
Yep.
so continue, my friend.
Yeah, so while he's doing that, the rest of the Defenders, along with Clay and Wong, are hanging out in another part of the house. Nighthawk wants action. You know, Luke Cage is bored and wondering what's going on. Clay is trying to explain it to all of them. When suddenly Jack shows up, and he berates them for not letting him know that they were alive.
Right. Well, this was a great bit actually, because he says, "You're here for crying out loud! I've been pacing the floor at Richmond's penthouse. Why didn't you call me? For all I knew, you were all dead." And Nighthawk is an asshole. And he's basically like, yeah, sorry, man. We've been busy battling bozos and alien apes. It slipped our collective conscious. And then, rightly so, Jack is like, okay, where's Valkyrie? Essentially, like, none of you seem concerned that my wife is missing. So then, of course, there's a long recap from Jack discussing what has happened before, about how
the battle with the Headmen and Chandu,
Exactly.
Aragorn getting wounded, Hulk smashing up the city.
Exactly.
Yep.
And then, you know, again, Nighthawk continues to be, you know, kind of a dick to Jack. But he says, don't go weepy and whiny on us, hubby. We're concerned too. Although he didn't seem that concerned a few minutes ago.
Right.
But he does tell Jack to start calling the hospitals to see if Valkyrie is there. He sends Cage and Red Guardian as if he's the leader now of this group, which is sort of an important point here. He sends them pounding the pavement for leads. Start around Midtown where Val and Chandu had their fray. And then he's going to fly off to investigate some hunches of his own while he's leaving Jack to call hospitals.
One thing I find interesting about this, you know, for the first time now, we see Nighthawk perhaps has a desire to be the leader of the Defenders. You know, Doctor Strange has been the de facto leader throughout the entire run of the book.
Right.
But what I find really interesting is Luke Cage bristles at the idea of Kyle Richmond being in charge. Cage has immense respect for Doctor Strange. He has no respect for Kyle Richmond here.
Right.
He even tells him when Nighthawk's trying to tell him what to do, he says, y'all best watch that bark in your voice, Napoleon, trying to hold it down to a ring of authority. You know, he's not going to jump when Nighthawk says jump.
Right.
And I find that interesting given later issues in this series that we'll get to sometime next year.
Yeah.
But I'll probably call back to this then.
Yep. I also thought, interestingly enough, I mean, and this keeps coming up, and And it keeps coming up, I think, if we'd done this show 2 years ago, I wouldn't be reacting the same way to, like, the Sons of the Serpent story that we did. I wouldn't be reacting the same way to these stories. But given the current state of our culture, these stories are taking on new meaning or resonating more strongly than they would have. Excuse me.
Absolutely.
And this next scene reads like it was written today, because it echoes so much of the conversation going on with #MeToo and the sexual harassment and sexual assault of women. It literally reads like a scene illustrating the events that we're talking. It was amazing reading through this. I was just like, wow, this is almost verbatim. So
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this whole thing with Valkyrie in prison, it's reminiscent of Bitch Planet by Kelly Sue DeConnick. I don't know if you read that or not. But it's
Kelly Sue is great, but I haven't read Bitch Planet yet.
It's really good. I wish it would come out a little more frequently, but it's basically, it takes the whole women in prison trope and knocks it on its ass and also puts it in space, which is just really cool. But and it's very, Bitch Planet is very much of now, and I think it's a very important comic. But I also think it's important to point out, here was Steve Gerber trying to do this and raise the consciousness back in the 70s in a mainstream Marvel comic. And again, I don't think the man gets enough credit for that. People talk about Howard the Duck and this and that, but they don't talk about the social issues that he imbued in Man-Thing.
Right.
He turned Man-Thing into a political and here in the Defenders, we've seen it, all the way back, as you said, to the Sons of the Serpent saga.
Yeah. So again, even though you even though you have this women in prison trope, it still plays out in a way that feels more sincere than the typical, the sort of typical trope of this. So basically, what happens is she's taken in to see the warden by a bunch of guards, and they tell the warden that she's a hellcat, she's trouble. But they leave her alone with the warden, and the warden basically starts pawing her and says, "Listen, you want to get by in this place, you need to play ball." And we know what he's talking about when he says play ball.
Right. He even puts his sweaty hand on her shoulder, and it's very clear. I mean, keep in mind this was approved by the Comics Code, but it's very clear what he's insinuating.
Yeah, and what's great is that the fact that she's in this women's prison has meant that she's unable to really harm her fellow inmates because she can't harm women.
Right.
But she just whacks the warden's hand away and says, "I'm eminently capable of protecting myself, sir." And she lifts him up by his tie and says, "And the notion of indulging in games of any sort with you, frankly, repulses me." She whips him around across the room. The guards come rushing in. And, he says, "Take her back to the high power block," whatever that is, "and put her to work." So we've seen a change in Valkyrie's status here.
Right. Meanwhile, back in Manhattan, Luke Cage and Red Guardian are walking the streets. And remember, Red Guardian is from what at the time was communist Russia. So Cage is sort of giving her a tour of 1970s Times Square.
Which is not the Times Square of today for anybody who might be young enough to not know that.
No, as she says, "Never have I walked amidst such squalor, such depravity, as in this place you call Times Square." And they see a woman who from behind looks like Valkyrie. And Cage taps her on the shoulder, and it turns out it's not Valkyrie. It's a junkie, glassy-eyed, and the junkie's boyfriend takes offense to this large, muscular black man tapping his white junkie girlfriend on the shoulder and makes it known. And it gets as racist as a 70s Marvel comic could.
Yeah, I mean, the guys, the response is very clearly racist.
Yeah.
he is way more deeply offended by the fact that Cage is black and touching his girlfriend than that he's touching his girlfriend in the first place.
Right. And a great bit of character development here. I mean, this is Luke Cage we're talking about. Instead of leveling the building with this guy,
right,
he forces himself to stay restrained. Red Guardian even comments he's shaking with anger. And Red Guardian beats the guy down instead. Cage restrains himself.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a great scene, actually.
Yeah.
We go back to the prison where the warden and the guards have Valkyrie, and they're about to make her basically mop the hallway, the corridor outside the cells of the women that we've seen in previous scenes. But Valkyrie tells off the warden. She says, basically, scrub the floor yourself, sir. I've done no wrong and rate no punishment. They all start applauding. The warden grabs her again, and this time she decks the bastard.
Right.
And then he's going to send her to solitary confinement at that point. And she's actually relieved. For most prisoners, It is tantamount to torture. For Val, it is a virtual reprieve, the first semblance of security since her jailing. She's not locked in. They're locked out.
Right. We get a quick interlude where Kyle Richmond goes to Connecticut. Previous listeners, you'll remember the Headmen's headquarters. It's been trashed twice there now, along with the neighbor's house, which Chris just takes so much glee in. The Headmen are gone. They're missing. They're not there. Then we go right back to the prison, and Valkyrie has decided she's had enough. She breaks out of solitary confinement, only to find out that her fellow inmates,
inspired by her,
they've engaged in an uprising. Even the bully who had been bullying her before is now in league in this riot that's taking place.
Yeah, there you go. We go back to Kyle, who in his not costumed guise has gone to see, who is this, the Attorney General or something, and he's now discovered.
He's the police commissioner.
Oh, the police commissioner, yeah. And Kyle's now discovered that Valkyrie is in prison. He's furious. He says, on what charge? And then the police commissioner makes a call, or is about to make a call, to have her released. And instead his phone rings, and he discovers there is a riot at the women's prison. And the big lady who is the de facto leader of this uprising is making all kinds of demands. They want an exterminator to clean out the rats, basically, which I think is a totally fair point. But Valkyrie at this point is brooding. She's talking to her friend Shirley about, being in here. And she wanted to avoid it. But Shirley, who's been sort of fairly meek up until now, says, that's easy for you to say after 2 days here. I've spent nearly a year in this hellhole, withdrawing from heroin without a doctor, putting up with the matron's bullying, waiting to be bitten in my sleep by some rabid rodent while my trial keeps getting postponed again and again. I'm sick of it. And if this will help, and Valkyrie's doubting that it will, but again, I was reading that and I was going, Jesus, now we're in a situation where basically, prison is an industry.
Right.
And that industry works very hard to make sure people get sent to prison because that's how they get paid.
Right.
Yeah, it's crazy how many things, 40, 50 years later, 40 years later are no better.
There's nothing new under the sun.
Yep.
So we switch then to a rooftop overlooking the prison where we have the defenders all gathered. Now, what's notable about this? Doctor Strange and the Hulk are missing. Now, we've talked before, when the Hulk is unavailable, they have Luke Cage on retainer to be their strong man, their strong guy. But what I love about this, and this wasn't happening in Doctor Strange's solo book at the time, but Steve Gerber takes Clay, who in Doctor Strange's book is basically written as Doctor Strange's girlfriend.
Known to the rest of us.
Right.
As Clea.
Yeah, Clea. What Steve Gerber does here, he gives her agency. She is the de facto master of the mystic arts while he's missing. So we have Jack, Clea, Cage, Red Guardian, and Nighthawk, and they decide they need a diversion to bust Valkyrie out. And Clea does this spell, which, makes this miniature sun, this giant fireball in the sky right over the prison.
There you go. It was a really interesting moment. I think you're right. I think that it's par for the course for this book, and it's what the book becomes more and more as we go on, as you bring in these characters who have never been given their own, never been given their own story arcs, never been given their own importance in other series, and they come in and they take on new significance.
Right.
Anyway, so there's the fight going on in the prison because the Valkyrie and the woman who has been her nemesis all along are finally getting down to it. They're finally throwing down in the midst of this. And while Valkyrie can't attack her, she can defend herself. And in the process of defending herself, the woman gets basically smashed into a wall. The other prisoners are thrilled and cheering for her. The defenders break in, and my favorite line is, "Cripes, it's a carload of superheroes," from one of the prisoners. So there you go. Her friends are there, but then Shirley says, "Felicia wasn't right, was she, about you, Val? You are on our side." And Cage says, "If she ain't, she will be when I lay my prison reform rap on her." And Valkyrie says she's learned quite enough firsthand. She's going to do everything she can to aid these women. So the riot ends at that point.
Right. But as we then turn to issue 40, Valkyrie still has a trial. Of course, they get their fellow defender Daredevil in his alter ego of Matt Murdock to represent her. Basically, she has to pay damages, and then the charges get dismissed. All the defenders seem happy about this, except for Jack Norris.
Right. Yeah. I thought this was a great scene. Again, it reminds me so much of how much I enjoyed the interconnectedness of the Marvel Universe in the 70s, and the Defenders was sort of the core of that, because everybody came and went, as we talk about all the time.
Yep.
So yeah, Jack seems to be unhappy about this situation.
Right. So, everybody wins. Valkyrie's a free woman.
She gets her sword back, which makes her very happy.
Yeah, she gets Dragonfang back. They all go back to the Sanctum Sanctorum, where Clea and Wong are anxiously awaiting news. There is a neat little interchange here. Now, keep in mind, this is the Luke Cage of the 70s. He was created as a homage to the blaxploitation films of the time. But there's a great little bit of dialogue where Clea asks, "All went well?" And Wong says, "Behold their faces, Clea. The answer shines from their eyes." And Luke Cage answers, "Right on, Wong, my man." I felt that scene was missing a fist bump. If Sal Buscema could have drawn a fist bump in there between Wong and Luke Cage.
Yeah, that is definitely missing. That you would not have that exchange with Jarvis, I don't think.
No.
In any case, Clea gives Valkyrie a gift because her clothes were destroyed by the prison.
Right.
They get rid of your clothes, apparently. I thought that was interesting. And it's an excuse for Gerber to give Valkyrie a new costume. So, interestingly, she says, "I don't know if I can accept this." And Nighthawk says, "Put the old warrior's pride aside, Pigtails, just this once. Take it upstairs if you'd be embarrassed to open it with everybody watching." He says, "We insist we'll be waiting for you in the parlor." And again, it's this weird thing where it's Kyle Richmond treats Valkyrie like she's his girlfriend.
Right.
Jack Norris is technically her husband, and he's being treated literally like he's not even there, like he's invisible. So he says, "I suppose I could join the others in the parlor," he's thinking. "Might as well go be alone with people as without, but I don't want to." So he goes in to sort of chat with her. He goes up to try to talk to her about everything that's going on. He sees her new outfit, which, and I found this really interesting, Brian, is no more or less revealing than her previous costume.
No.
But for some reason, Jack is like, look, he's objecting to how revealing the costume is. And he was hoping that she would give up this warrior woman foolishness to basically play house with him.
Right. And, I mean, I feel for Jack. I felt for Jack throughout this entire comic. It's not his fault that his wife's body has been inhabited with the spirit of an Asgardian warrior.
Yeah, exactly.
But the guy needs to learn to take no for an answer. And as we're going to find out here, this is where he does start to finally realize, okay, she's not my wife. She's not Barbara. She's this Valkyrie person.
Well, I also think we've talked about it before, and I think it's key to point out here that her response to him is, I am who I am. I inhabit the body of Barbara Norris, Jack, but my persona is not hers. My feeling for you, whatever it is or was, is mine, not hers. So she's also confessing, look, I do have feelings for you, but you've got to stop being an asshole.
Right. We then cut to a park where Doctor Strange is still engaged in searching his soul, trying to find out what's wrong with him. There's a politician nearby giving a stump speech. He's running for Senate. And Doctor Strange, very uncharacteristically, does a little spell and makes this guy's pants fall down on stage in front of a crowd. And as soon as he does it, he's like, what momentary madness possessed me to perpetrate so puerile a prank? So again, it's he realizes there's something off with him. And then he runs across a paper boy, and he gets the paper, and he realizes that Nebulon, in his guise as the little bald man, is to be made a United Nations envoy. And there's another article. Someone named Ruby Thursday announces her candidacy for president. Now, we know that one of the headmen is named Ruby, but she has a very striking head in that it's a giant red crystal ball. This Ruby Thursday, featured here in the paper, looks nothing like her. She has a human face. She has pigtails like Valkyrie. Curiouser and curiouser.
Then we go to what is the most curious of all of the moments of this story, where the Hulk is leaping across, I assume the American Midwest somewhere.
Southwestern U.S.
Southwestern U.S. And in some kind of downtown in the Southwestern USA, there is an actual snuff film playing in a movie theater. Because that happened, I guess. And people are outside protesting the fact that this snuff film is playing in a movie theater, as you would. And the people who are protesting are very angry at the man who owns the theater. They're yelling at him. And as the Hulk is leaping by, he lands in the midst of the protest, shattering the ground, and yells, "Waste! Stupid humans want waste! Hulk will show you waste!" Whatever that means. And then Hulk just basically tears the theater down. But then Hulk says, what did Hulk show puny humans? Why did Hulk wreck building? He's also puzzled by his behavior.
Right.
And he leaps away, Brian, leaving us with a 5-panel thing showing one of those protesters having hidden out in a restroom.
Right. She's in the women's restroom across the street from the ruins of the theater. But she's not in that restroom alone, because stepping out of one of the stalls is an elf
with a gun.
Who then shoots her.
I challenge you in your next novel to have at least 5 random scenes in which an elf with a gun suddenly appears and shoots people, and not to explain it.
I don't know. I'm fairly certain Marvel has trademarked the elf with a gun. No.
Well, if you say it's an elf with a gun, I mean, you're not saying it's this elf with a gun.
I guess maybe I could get away with it. Here's a little thing we've never talked about on the show. I've talked about it on my podcast, The Horror Show with Brian Keene. For a brief time, I wrote articles for the Outhousers. Now, for those who aren't familiar with the Outhousers, it's a comic book news website, but it's more like The Onion than it is Bleeding Cool. A lot of the stories back then were, obviously made up satirical stories. A common headline might be, Brian Michael Bendis to write all Marvel comics released in January. Just stuff like that. Marvel still hasn't collected Chris Golden's Punisher run. But I didn't, because I write in comics, I didn't want my byline on it. I didn't, if I made fun of somebody in a satirical way, I certainly didn't want to offend them. So my byline was elf with a gun.
Oh, that's funny. That is funny.
And Marvel never objected to that. So, yeah, maybe we could put him in a novel.
Yeah, I mean, you could say it's an elf with a gun. I also think when this episode is over that we should spend a few minutes talking about the novella we're going to write called Clown Army. For which I have an idea.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Okay.
Anyway.
I don't know. For the rest of this issue, did you get the sense that this was a filler? The second half of this issue?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, it is a really weird kind of thing that happens. I think it was a way, two things are happening here. The first thing that's happening is that Jack Norris has finally had enough with the way that everybody's behaving. The world's going crazy. Basically what he's reacting to is sort of what our world is now, only as far as we know, the Headmen have nothing to do with it.
Right.
The whole world's going crazy. All this horrible stuff is happening, and you're not doing anything.
Yeah, you're superheroes. You're supposed to be preventing shit like that.
Exactly. You're not. He's basically saying to them that they're too distracted to be taking seriously some stuff that is way more serious than their reactions would seem to indicate. And he gets and then Nighthawk is an asshole, and he says, "All right, pal," Nighthawk says, "that's it. I've had it with you. What does it take to make you learn? Better yet, what would it take to make you leave?" And then, astonishing any reader of this comic, Jack Norris says, "You really want to know? About $300,000. And Nighthawk says, "You got it." Jack tells them all off, and Nighthawk calls the bank and says, "There's a cashier's check with your name on it at my bank. Get it and get lost." Jack says, "With pleasure," and slams the door as he goes out. And Valkyrie just says, "Jack?" in small letters, like she's like, "Wait a second."
Yeah, because this is so uncharacteristic for this character.
Yeah.
And we'll find out. We don't want to spoil it. When we get to the annual, we'll find out exactly what Jack is up to here. But one other thing during this exchange between him and the other defenders, when he's berating them for not being actual superheroes and stopping the world from going insane, he says, "The whole world's going crazy. Nebulon's about to be appointed to the United Nations. That loony lady in California with her global head political party." Okay, so again, he's referring to this Ruby Thursday woman.
Right.
Who's running for president. But the name of her party is Global Head. Yep. And he also mentions that she's in favor of brainwashing criminals. Now, who else?
I love the fact that you're playing this like people don't know what we're talking about.
I didn't. Little Brian did not pick up that it was Ruby and the Headmen. 50-year-old Brian rereading this in Marvel Masterworks is like, how did you not pick up on that, little Brian?
All right. Well, basically, at that point, folks, we go into what, as Brian said, is a sort of is filler, but also is kind of a fun. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 page sort of sideline story in which Red Guardian kind of hits the streets and has her own little sort of sub adventure where she battles a group of toughs, one of whom has giant metal fists.
Right. And quite frankly, I didn't understand the politics of this when I was a kid. And at 50, I'm still not sure I understand the politics of this.
Yeah.
It has something to do with they're trapped here in America because of our immigration policies. But, whatever Gerber was trying to get at here, it's still lost on me.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like basically this is some kind of Russian mob thing, and basically once they realize that this is the Red Guardian, they decide, well, if they can capture her, they'll be rewarded for that. Of course, they fail, and she ends up knocking them all senseless, and the police will eventually come and take them away. Right. She returns to the Sanctum Sanctorum,
where Doctor Strange has returned as well.
Right. There you go. And he's been caught up by the other defenders. She looks like she's about to collapse because she's so exhausted. And she says, I shall elaborate once I've rested. And Dr. Strange said, indeed, we can wait until then, but I strongly suggest we do so at our meeting place in Queens. The notion of terrorists prowling this house with all my arcane paraphernalia about alarms me profoundly. So they're going to leave. And then he says, but where's Jack? I wanted to consult him on what's the matter? What did I say? Because the defenders are all giving him a sort of strange look. And Nighthawk has to explain that Jack is gone. And then Cage, still, sort of probably resentful about Jack, says, don't you fret about him, Doc. Wherever that Joker's headed, he's traveling in style. Like,
that's right, $300,000.
He's sold out is the implication that Luke is making there.
But what's great here is that while the others, right up to the end, when he supposedly got this payoff, while the others did not view Jack as a defender, Doctor Strange clearly does. Now, maybe that's because it was Jack and Doctor Strange who helped the Guardians of the Galaxy. But Doctor Strange sees him as an equal member of the team who he wished to consult with.
Yep, whose input he wanted at that point.
Right.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting, too, because he takes Jack seriously and values him, and it's clear that certainly Nighthawk didn't, and Cage didn't. Okay, anyway, then we get to the king-size annual #1 of the Defenders, which wraps up this whole crazy business, written by Gerber, once again drawn by Buscema and Klaus Janson. World Gone Sane, ? And we find out right away, Brian, that what has Jack Norris been up to?
He did not sell out. It was all carefully planned. He has left a videotape behind for the Defenders, and we open with Doctor Strange, Cage, Red Guardian, Valkyrie, and Nighthawk watching that videotape, where he tells them, I'm about to undertake the most foolishly dangerous mission of my life, one from which I will never return. What we then get is a multi-page recap of this entire saga, the initial appearance of the Headmen, Nebulon, and the Lubderdites kidnapping Jack, whose consciousness is in Chandu's brain, in Nighthawk's body.
Not anymore. Let's not confuse people.
But
let's sum up, though. To sum up what happens in this recap is the recap helps as Doctor Strange and the Defenders realize that when they were in the captivity of the Headmen did something to their brains that has caused them to behave in this way that is not normal for them. It's caused them to overlook many of the things that have been it's much like Facebook in some ways. It's caused them to overlook many of the things that are happening in the world that they should have been paying more attention to. That's why Doctor Strange has been behaving oddly, and his magic has been odd. It's why Nighthawk has been irritable and behaving oddly. It's why the Hulk has been behaving oddly. And we also find
you had actually commented on that, Chris. I don't know if you remember when we started the Headmen Nebulon Saga, and in issue 33, Negan, aka Gorilla Man, tells his fellow Headmen the process is complete, if listeners go back and listen to that episode, you're like, what process? It doesn't look like he did anything.
Right, yeah.
Here it comes calling back all these issues later. But basically, Jack says, that the Headmen altered their thought patterns, and that the Headman's plan is to conquer the world without employing force. They're going to do it through political and economic machinations. So
ding, ding.
Jack, I'm sorry, what?
I just said ding, ding, once again, echoes of 2017.
So Jack is going to go undercover. He's gonna start by investigating this Ruby Thursday person.
Holy shit, Brian! I just realized why Trump looks the way he looks.
He's one of the Headmen?
He's got a gorilla body.
Oh my God! You never see him without. Is there a shirtless photo of Trump out there?
God, I hope not. Anyway, Doctor Strange basically decides, well, it's time to take action. He sends Nighthawk and Red Guardian to probe the situation in Paris, where there's this nonsense going on, people protesting, etc., etc. He sends Cage and Valkyrie to investigate mass murders in India. They were trying to find the connections amongst all of these things. Jack is off doing one of those things in Los Angeles, and so Doctor Strange is going to go investigate what's going on in Washington, D.C.
Right.
We get to Paris. Nighthawk and Red Guardian appear as a bunch of bozos, the army of clowns, the clown army, they're using a guillotine, and they are about to cut off the head of a businessman.
Right. Basically, this is a version of I can't remember.
You can't even think today.
I can't even think. The protests against the 1%. What was that called?
When? French Revolution?
Occupy. Basically, this is an Occupy protest on.
But it's Occupy wrong. Bozos.
Right. Instead of a bunch of folks from Portland, you've got people in clown masks,
exactly,
practicing celestial mind control, and they've built a guillotine to execute this 1%er businessman.
Yep. And Red Guardian says it reminds her of the fever that swept the motherland in 1917. So basically, Nighthawk leaves this businessman that he rescued on a rooftop and flies away. He goes back. He fights the clowns. He grabs Red Guardian and one of the clown protesters, or the clown army members, a French woman, and goes back. And then they're on the rooftop with the businessman, Red Guardian, and this clown. And Nighthawk's like, what's going on? Why you? This guy works for somebody called the Company Deluxe, meaning of light.
Right.
One of the stocks his broker picked up for him, a think tank operation. So basically, the bozos kidnapped him because they fear that one corporation for some reason. And the bozo they've got with them will not speak about why that company is of such interest to Nebulon and the Celestial Mind Control Company.
Right.
And then basically what happens, Brian, is that Red Guardian disguises herself as that clown woman, Marie, and she goes, in disguise to infiltrate the group of French clown army people.
Right. And as we find out...
People are listening to this right now going, wait, what?
Well, wait, they're gonna do a double what here in a second, because we haven't mentioned the Lumberdites much.
Oh my God.
As he had in New York, Nebulon has set up these celestial mind control centers all over the world now. And this one in Paris is not only populated by the clown people, it's also populated by the Lumberdites. If you're a new listener, they're a red-skinned amphibious race. They're basically like the creature from the Black Lagoon. They're a very high-tech, peaceful alien race who Nebulon is convinced to help him save humanity here on Earth. They're what I found interesting about this, Chris, in previous issues, the Lumberdites were drawn without clothing.
Yep.
Did you notice in this issue they're all wearing yellow shorts?
Yeah, no, I didn't notice that. It does look like they have underpants on now.
Yeah.
So apparently somebody felt, one of the Lumberdites apparently ate from the apple of the tree of knowledge, and decided they were ashamed of their nakedness.
Or Roy Thomas actually flipped through the pages before they went to the printer just to see what Gerber had been up to and say, hey.
I mean, they're alien amphibian, like frog creatures. Who cares if they're naked? Jesus. The Ludberdites Underpants. That's another band name, I guess. Anyway, look, basically, a lot of this felt like nonsense to me, Brian. Like, honestly, I have to be honest about it. The whole thing, but so basically, the Headmen are now controlling this company, Deluxe, the company of light, in Paris, and Negan is the president of the firm. They're going up against Nebulon in some fashion. Nighthawk goes to investigate with Red Guardian. He finds Red Guardian has been gassed. We don't know what the gas does at this point. We're about to find out. And then, what the hell's the name of the guy with the melty face again?
Jerry. He doesn't
Right.
have a supervillain name. He's just Jerry.
The Dick Tracy villain gasses him. Gasses Nighthawk. We go to New Delhi, India. And this is where it starts to get interesting. The Paris stuff was just like, it didn't make any sense to me.
Well, wait. I can sum it up because I'm a little bit more conspiracy theory minded than you. So for our listeners who enjoy a good conspiracy theory, the Headmen have basically established themselves as the Illuminati, as the New World Order, while the Defenders have been busy, with all this other nonsense. The Headmen, okay, whose leader is a gorilla with a human head, have taken over everything from the automobile industry to the Indian government. Okay, they're into everything now. We go to New Delhi, India.
Right. So we go to New Delhi, India, where Valkyrie and Cage, to make it short, discover that what's going on is that the Headmen are using some kind of bizarre gas to shrink people down. This is basically the movie Downsizing with Matt Damon, to shrink down their enemies or people they want to kidnap, and are keeping them in a metal box with holes punched in it, like a little kid with a frog. And then Negan,
I love it.
Gorilla Man shows up to because I don't know why he happens to be there at the moment. Gorilla Man then fights Luke Cage, which that page is the best thing about this annual, is the page of Gorilla Man and Cage fighting. And then Cage basically ends up crashing through into a room where people are waiting to die.
Right.
They're so sick, they have no money for doctors, no doctors to help them, and that distraction is enough for Cage to get gassed.
Valkyrie gets shrunk down.
Right. To get shrunk down. Valkyrie is overwhelmed by a bunch of Negan's henchmen. She manages to beat them back, but that's enough of a distraction that she gets shrunk down.
Right.
And then what I'm sure is your favorite bit.
Chapter 3, Jack Norris, Secret Agent.
Love it.
And yeah, this is we get first person narration from Jack in the caption boxes. Basically like he's a low rent 007. And it's all about him infiltrating the campaign of this mysterious presidential candidate, Ruby Thursday, which, if you haven't figured it out, folks, is in fact the fourth member of the Headmen, Ruby. You get pages and pages of, Jack infiltrating her organization, etc. But,
and then
Ruby,
very suavely trying to seduce her.
Right. And, Ruby, of course, knows who he is, knocks him out. Jack wakes up tied up. But we find out what he did with that money that Kyle Richmond gave him. He bought himself a whole bunch of 007 spy gear.
And that's why he wanted the $300,000, folks, by the way. He wasn't selling out or betraying them. He needed the money to run his infiltration operation and become Jack Norris' secret agent. And he eventually uses the gizmos that he's gotten for himself, his very Q-esque 007 gizmos, to free himself from being her prisoner. And he goes out and exposes her to the people gathered at a big fundraiser for her candidacy.
Right. At which point Ruby Thursday reveals herself to, of course, be Ruby. Her human head changes back to the red crimson globe. She does the tentacle thing. She overpowers Jack. And then, Chris, perhaps the most unexpected cameo appearance in any issue of the Defenders.
All right, wait. Before you reveal that.
Oh, okay.
I just want to say, because Steve Bissett would be ashamed of me if I didn't bring this up. Those of you who have any interest in the story of Ruby Thursday, and she's presenting herself as this, and I know we're out of time here, but she's presenting herself as this sort of country, pipe smoking. She smokes a corncob pipe. It's like she's out of some cartoon strip, basically. And I just wanted to say that it seems to me Gerber has to have been influenced by the Andy Griffith film classic A Face in the Crowd.
Oh, good point.
There's got to be the fact that she's got this corncob pipe and is very, very country. There seems to be no question that her candidacy in this whole thing, even though it's very adjacent, it seems like a natural to me. But anyway, continue.
I agree. So yeah, we then go to Chapter 4, the White House, where real-life President Gerald Ford is about to delegate Nebulon to the United Nations. And Dr. Strange decides he can't have that happen, so Dr. Strange kidnaps President Ford, takes him to another dimension so that they can have a chat. Nebulon shows up in that dimension. And
as the little bald guy, and then reveals himself to be Nebulon.
Yeah, and we have a really well-written, and we're not going to read it here because, as Chris said, we are running out of time, but a very well-written debate between Doctor Strange and Nebulon with President Ford listening in about, liberating humanity and enslaving humanity and what's the difference and free will. It's really good stuff. Yeah. But because it's a Marvel comic, it then comes down to, Doctor Strange and Nebulon fighting.
Right. Oh, it is a really interesting argument. When Nebulon is saying you've created a society whose technology has far outstripped its psychology. I think that's true, but
absolutely,
it's a very interesting thing. But I will say my favorite bit of dialogue. I know we don't want to take too much time, but when Gerald Ford says, "Gentlemen, I beg you, call a halt to these hostilities. We can reason out your differences, decide the fate of the world in a civilized manner in my office." In any case, they end up back in his office.
Right.
Doctor Strange has been defeated by Nebulon, and the president is going forward with his plan.
And he steps up to the podium, and the media are all there about to film it, and Doctor Strange says, "Nope, fuck this noise." He magically gags the president of the United States.
Exactly.
The Secret Service go to shoot at him. Doctor Strange perhaps has been reading some Batman comics from the competition. When the Secret Service fire their guns at him, little flags with the word "bang" written come out of the barrel. Nebulon and Doctor Strange then begin debating the president's free will when suddenly somebody gasses everybody on the White House lawn, and they all get shrunk down as well.
Of course they do. And then we see that basically the entire White House lawn has been shrunken down, and all the people that the Headmen have shrunk to downsizing size are captured together, including Nebulon. The debate continues, but something is going on with Doctor Strange because
Wait. I don't think you're doing that splash page justice. Okay.
okay.
The Headmen are assembled in full form. You've got Gorilla Man, Chandu the Mystic still in that whack-ass body they made for him, Ruby, and, of course, good old Jerry. And they have a giant magnifying glass to peer at their little ant farm. And you're right, they've captured the Defenders, Nebulon,
and the President of the United States.
The President of the United States, the Lubderdites.
And a bunch of random Indian guys.
A bunch of random Indian people from New Delhi, and the Clown People Army.
The Bozos.
All shrunk down to the size of cigarette butts, all living together in this little metal box.
Oh my God.
But yes. Yeah, what is Doctor Strange up to, Chris?
Well, basically, their debate continues, including Luke Cage, who includes his own philosophy, Brian. He says, Christmas, I ain't even sure what we're trying to save. Ain't nothing so nifty about the world I last saw out there. Folks get the kind of world they want and deserve. Maybe.
Yeah, by the way, I agree with Luke Cage on that, but...
Yeah, I know you do. And then, of course, Red Guardian starts to argue about oligarchy. So that continues. And basically, Stephen Strange goes catatonic. Chandu reveals or says he's aware what's happening here is that Strange has sent out his astral body somehow. And surprise, coming to the rescue is the astral form of Doctor Strange, not 5 inches tall, but at normal height, and the Incredible Hulk.
But where are Hulk and Doctor Strange coming to the rescue at? Because this is what I love about the fucking Defenders and the fucking Headmen, okay? First, they set their secret supervillain headquarters in the Connecticut suburbs.
Yep.
Now
they are in, where are they, Brian?
Norman, Oklahoma.
Oh, God. All right. So the Hulk smashes through the wall. Ruby Thursday's head shoots off her body and battles the Hulk independently of anybody else. The flying, green head of Ruby Thursday is just whipping around for no apparent reason. Hold on a second.
Right.
And the head locks onto the Hulk's fist. The Hulk is unable to get the thing off his fist. And Doctor Strange's astral body says, "The dome, Hulk, strike the dome."
And Hulk does, and it shatters. And
all the 5-inch people return to their natural height. There you go.
Yeah, we will read that caption because it's just glorious. Nebulon exerts his own transdimensional power because now you have Nebulon fighting alongside the Defenders against the Headmen.
Right.
Nebulon saves all the inhabitants of the dome from getting cut up by glass.
And there is a line that actually says, "They are tiny no more."
Yeah, and here's the line I love. And the Headmen's command post is suddenly maddeningly overrun with rapidly sprouting bozos, Ludberdites, Indians, and Defenders. And that sums up this entire fucking saga right there.
Oh, God. Do we need to go through this?
We don't.
You wrap it up. You wrap it up for me, Brian.
All right. Basically what happens is you have all of the Defenders, including Jack Norris,
still dressed in his James Bond costume.
Yeah. All the Defenders, Nebulon, the Lubderdites, and the Bozos, and these random sick people from New Delhi, India, who just wanted to die in peace, fighting the Headmen. The Defenders make quick work of the Headmen, and then what it comes down to is Doctor Strange and Nebulon in a final confrontation. They don't result to fisticuffs. Instead, Doctor Strange says, there's something you must experience, Nebulon, something to which all your science, all your research cannot make you privy. You must learn what it is to be human. And then he does, using the Eye of Agamotto. And Nebulon decides that, the human race is beyond redemption. He and the Lubberdites cannot help us. and he is going to abandon his efforts, and he leaves.
Yeah. I like the line Strange says, "We attain our most glorious heights when we admit our ignorance and forge onward to surmount it." But yeah, that's it. And Nighthawk says, rightly so, that's it. He surrendered because he figures we're a hopeless case. Yeah.
And that brings the Headmen Nebulon Saga to a close. But it's not the end of the Elf with a Gun.
Yeah, but wait a second. The one last bit, and we're way over time, and apologies to folks. We just needed to finish this saga because it's gone on long enough. Doctor Strange's last word balloon there. "For now, let us, yourself included," he's talking to Jack, "savor what victory we've won. Let us, if only for a moment, be bozos one and all." So, Brian, I think that should be the name of the novella that I'm telling you that we're going to write together. It's called Bozos One and All.
Okay. And that brings us to the end of another episode. Next week, we're going to be talking about Steve Gerber's final issue of The Defenders. And we're also going to be talking about his crossover with a character that I know is near and dear to Chris's heart, Brian said sarcastically, Howard the Duck.
Oh, man. Well, we'll talk about it later. But that issue, sadly, I was so excited when I realized there was an issue of Marvel Treasury Edition with the Defenders that I had not read, and then I read it. And on that note, thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Excelsior, true believers.
Excelsior, true believers. We'll see you next week.
Hey, guys, this is Ryan.
Nick. And Mike.
The hosts of Your New Opinion. We're a bi-weekly comedy debate podcast.
Just a group of idiot friends who are very opinionated.
Each episode, we debate some hot-button issue and use every trick we can to get our judge to side with us.
You know, hot-button issues like books versus movies, Is the Earth Flat, and Godzilla versus King Kong.
We cover topics like pop culture, conspiracy theories, and everyday absurdity.
So find us on iTunes or wherever you download podcasts every other Friday. Again, that's Your New Opinion, only on the Project Entertainment Network.
Three Guys with Beards.
The Project Entertainment Network store, featuring t-shirts, mugs, stickers, hoodies and more from your favorite Project Entertainment Network podcasts.
Inkstain Scribbler's Rest.
The Horror Show with Brian Keene.
Why not show your loyalty by wearing a cool product from the podcast group and show off to your friends?
It Cooks.
Armcast.
The Mondo Method Monster Attack.
Necrocastic.
Go to projectentertainmentnetwork.com and click on the store tab for more details.
The Liars Club podcast.
Bizarre.
The Lunch Ladies Book Club.
Matters of Faith.
The Project Entertainment Network store, stacked with stuff from the best podcasts on the internet.
The Curtain Jerkers.
Buttercup of Doom.
www.projectentertainmentnetwork.com.
This has been an exclusive presentation of the Project Entertainment Network.